Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the July meeting of the National Park Planning Committee. I apologise for the late start, but our previous meeting overran, and so we thought the best thing to do was to delay the start of planning by a quarter of an hour. So thank you for bearing with us and for being here today. Item 1 is apologies for absence. Are there any, please? No, all present, thank you. Item 2 is declarations of interest, stroke lobbying of members, stroke unaccompanied site visits. So item 1 is, are there any interests that any members may have in relation to any of the items on the agenda for this meeting? Mr. Gein.
I'm not sure, Chair, but if
microphone, please.
Sorry.
Thank you.
Yes, I'm a member of Exmoor Young Voices who actually supported this application, or I forget what the number is now, but yeah. So I was told I should declare it, but it doesn't affect my ability to take part in debate.
Thank you. I'm also an advisor to the Young Voices, so that's a pertinent item to bring up. Thank you. Mr. Yabsley.
Thank you, Chairman. I've been lobbied by letter.
I'll come on to that in a moment. Are there any other interests, please?
Quite a few of us are National Trust members.
That will be noted on your declaration, which is available on the website. Right. So if we're clear that any interests have been declared. Item 2, any lobbying by anyone concerned with the planning application and unaccompanied site visits. Can I just say that, as far as I am aware, all members have been emailed by Mr. Carew on the 24th of June. Is there anybody that wasn't? You've all received that email. Okay. Mr. Leader, is there any comment that you wish to make on that?
Yes, you have a code of conduct, Chair. And it's called Code of Conduct in Practice Planning. And one of the things it talks about is lobbying. And it starts off by saying lobbying is a normal and proper part of the planning process, which it is, provided you do certain things. Now, one of the certain things you're required to do is this. It's a bullet point contained in a box. It says, where a member has been lobbied about the application prior to a planning decision being made by the planning committee, they must disclose that fact at the meeting, stating whether they have been lobbied to support or refuse the application, or both. The minutes shall record all such declarations made. Now, we know that the Bowyer planning statement and the advice provided by Counsel Angeli Foster are both documents that contain material in support of the application. We also know all members have received that advice and statement, so we can formally minute all members received that advice and statement and each was in support. That deals with a particular part of the code. The only other thing I would observe is that in the interest of transparency, we have gone further than we are required to do under our code of conduct. Because ordinarily, if a member is lobbied, they would disclose that, it would be minuted. But we would not tell people what it was that was said to the member by way of lobbying. But in this case, we have said what the members have been told, because insofar as we've been able to, we have provided copies of the documents to interested third parties. Now, it may be some people didn't get them, I don't know whether that's right or wrong, but you're under no obligation to do that, you have done. The only other matter I need to touch upon is I think we have been asked by email whether or not this material has been consulted on. It may be that I've not got that quite right, but the short point is this. The material is not a part of the planning application. We are not asked to take it into account as part of the application documentation. Therefore, it is not on our website as it would have been under the relevant application number, because it's not part of the documentation. So, I hope, Chairman, that deals with everything compendious.
Thank you very much. And can I just welcome Mr. Leader to this meeting as our legal advisor on this occasion. We're very pleased to have you with us, Mr. Leader. Thank you. So if there are no other points under that item, ladies and gentlemen, we'll move to the minutes of the meeting held on the 4th of June. May I take them as a true record of the proceedings, please? Thank you. Proposed, seconded by Mr. Gean. All in favour? Any against? Any abstentions?
I didn't attend.
No.
So I can't.
Any matters arising from page 1 or page 2? No. Item 4 is public speaking. We do have a number of public speakers for the meeting this afternoon, and they will be called when we get to the relevant item. Could I just make it clear to all members of the public who might be speaking that 2 minutes is the time that you are normally allowed. I invariably exercise Chairman's discretion to allow you to bring your remarks to a conclusion, so that tends to be 20 seconds or so, but beyond that I'm afraid you will be stretching patience, and you will be asked to draw your remarks to a conclusion as quickly as possible, but there is a degree of discretion, as I say. There are 2 speakers in relation to item 5.1 who are going to be allowed 5 minutes. One because it is the applicant, and the other because that particular spokesman will be speaking on behalf of a number of other people. So it has been agreed that in the interest of transparency and balance, one of the opponents will be speaking for 5 minutes and the applicant will also be speaking for 5 minutes. So I hope that's clear and fair. So item 5 is development management. The first item, 5.1, is application 62923-006, the proposed demolition of the existing bungalow and sheds, erection of replacement eco-bungalow and new shed, resubmission of application at Hellstone Bungalow, Alaford and Minehead, and this is going to be presented by Mr. White.
Thank you, Chairman. As members know, at the meeting on the 5th of March 2024, the authority resolved to grant planning permission, contrary to the officer's recommendation, for the demolition of the existing bungalow and sheds and the erection of a replacement bungalow and shed. A planning decision notice to that effect was issued on the 11th of March 2024. On the 27th of March 2024, CPRE Somerset issued a judicial review pre-action protocol letter challenging the decision to grant planning permission on several grounds. The authority conceded on one ground only, which was in essence that the committee failed to demonstrate that it had reached any determination as to whether or not the proposal complies with policy HCD 17 to C of the local plan. Or more particularly, the authority fell into error because it failed to grapple with the question whether the proposed replacement dwelling would reflect the massing and scale of the original dwelling. The grant of planning permission is therefore being quashed, and the application is brought before the committee for redetermination. Members must come to this afresh and come to it with an open mind from the beginning. Everything considered previously in relation to the application must be thought about afresh. It's for me to be clear at the outset that the officers maintain their recommendation that planning permission should be refused. There are 2 grounds for this, and the reasons for that are set out on page 6 of the agenda papers, which I shall come back to at the end of this presentation. In summary, officers consider that the proposal does not satisfactorily reflect the scale and mass of the original dwelling, and that by virtue of a combination of its larger scale and mass, its stepped and longer form and more extensive fenestration would draw the eye and cause harm to the character and appearance of the landscape. Moreover, there is considered to be insufficient evidence to demonstrate that the proposal would not have an unacceptable impact on statutorily protected species, namely foraging and feeding bats, due to potential for light spill from the increase in the expanse of glass from the large windows proposed within the dwelling. Turning to the main part of the presentation this afternoon, I have a number of slides to show, and I will take some time doing this. With the following slides, we will look at the submitted plans again, and I will show the proposed plans in relation to the existing plans. I have some photos to show again, and I will spend some time going through the most important local plan policies which form the basis of the officer recommendation. As a brief recap, and in terms of this slide, Helston Bungalow lies in the open countryside to the north of Bossington. It's right at the northern extent of the red line, as we can see on the plan in front of us. The site is considered to be a sensitive site, given its remote location away from other built forms and its position within the Heritage Coast designation. The access from Bossington is over a rough track, over which the southwest coast path also passes. The site lies on the lower slopes of Bossington Hill, within a high quality landscape comprising woodland along the lower slopes with moorland on the higher ground overlooking farmland within the coastal setting. And the photograph on the slide is used to give an idea. It's looking towards Bossington Hill, but it gives clearly an idea of what the landscape we're dealing with here in terms of its remoteness, tranquility and naturalness. The naturalness of this coastal margin, the remoteness of the site and the nature and conditions of the access track contributes to a prevailing sense of tranquility, natural and undeveloped character, and that can be seen from the photo. The existing dwelling is noticeable from the coast path, but it is low-key, comprising a rather unassuming dwelling which is relatively low in height and plain in appearance. By way of update to the committee report, since we last discussed this application in March and leading into this committee, we have received 2 further letters of objection, and the matters raised are consistent with those already outlined in the representation section of the officer report. This is the existing plan showing the existing bungalow. The papers refer to an exam planning permission to build a garage to the left-hand side of the dwelling in the side that we see here. I can get the cursor on it. That's the garage there. It's not currently on site, but there is an exam planning permission for it in place. And the proposals include the demolition of the existing sheds in the field to the north of the existing dwelling, as we can see on the plan. These are the existing west and east elevations. The existing dwelling is timber clad. Its small scale, low height, materials and weather and plain appearance mean it's relatively discreet and subdued within its setting. These are the existing north and south elevations. The plan notes the proximity to the southwest coast path. As you can see, someone stood on the path just here in relation to the dwelling, and it picks up the relative levels of the site compared to the path, with the path set below, and so such views of the dwelling tend to be up into the site, where as a result changes in the scale can be more noticeable. This is the existing floor plan. The accuracy of the plans has been disputed. Nonetheless, it is clear that the existing dwelling is less than 93 square metres, and it has a floor area around 66 square metres. That's the proposed site plan. It shows vehicle parking accommodated within the site, and the proposed dwelling would be over the footprint of the existing dwelling, which would accord with 2A of policy HCD 17. These are the proposed elevations. The proposal is for a single-storey dwelling with a linear form and a stepped roof and elevation. It would have a floor area of approximately 78 square metres. It would have a larger footprint than the existing dwelling, although it would be less than 93 square metres. The building would be timber clad with reclaimed clay tiles for the roof and integrated solar panels. The veranda and more extensive glazing, especially on the west elevation, which is the drawing at the top of the plan, and the more open elevation. And its step form creates a much more elaborate dwelling in contrast to what is currently experienced on site. So it creates something which is much more gentrified than the basic form of the dwelling that we presently see. These are the end gables of the proposed dwelling. And again, you can note the footpath on the top plan, or the top part of the plan here. That's the coast path, obviously the dwelling set above. This shows the proposed floor plan, as well as the context of parking to the left-hand side and the southwest coast path running along the bottom edge down here. The proposals include a new outbuilding, which would lie to the south of the proposed dwelling, would accommodate a biomass boiler, as well as a store for solar panel batteries, domestic equipment and a bat roost in the roof. It would be constructed from matching materials and would be a scale subservient to the proposed dwelling, although it would contribute to the overall mass of buildings proposed at the site. This is a slide with the existing site plan to the left-hand side and the proposed site plan to the right-hand side. Even accounting for the extant garage building, which has not been built and therefore does not form part of the baseline consideration, the proposed dwelling would be much longer. And this proposed plan does not pick up the proposed new outbuilding, which would be to the right-hand side of the proposed dwelling. So it would be over here on this slide in here. This shows the proposed west elevation at the top and the existing elevation at the bottom. So it's a nice comparison between existing and proposed, where we can begin to look at the difference in scale and mass of the development. The existing elevation outlines the garage building that has been approved but not built. Viewing the existing and proposed plans against each other is helpful in assessing whether the scheme reflects the scale and mass of the existing dwelling. The proposed dwelling would be more than 9 metres longer in elevation, and at its highest point it would be more than 1.5 metres taller than the existing. Members will also note that there would be more windows, which are also larger and therefore introduce greater potential for light spill. The wall along the west elevation would be about 52% window on the proposed scheme, whereas the existing dwelling is approximately 23% window and door on its west elevation. This shows the proposed south at the top and the existing south lower down. The proposed dwelling would be slightly tapered and at its maximum depth would be shallower than the existing dwelling when having regard to the veranda, whilst the proposed dwelling would have a stepped elevation. At its widest point it would be approximately 7.8 metres, whereas the existing dwelling is about 8.7 metres at its widest point, including the veranda. So there would be about 0.9 metres difference in overall width, with the proposed dwelling being narrower. This slide shows the proposed site plan at the top compared against the existing site plan, which is shown below. Here's some photographs. This is stood on the southwest coast path. The gable end, we can see there's a northern aspect of the dwelling, as is. And then again, still from the southwest coast path, but moved to the other end of the building, looking up at it. The committee papers include the relevant local plan policies. This includes policy HCD 17, which is specifically concerned with replacement dwellings. Clause 1 of that policy, which is on the screen before us, outlines a basis when proposals for the erection of a replacement dwelling will be permitted. The proposed scheme is considered to accord with the requirements under Clause 1. In terms of the criteria under Clause 2, as set out in the update Officer report, the proposed scheme is considered to comply with paragraphs 2A and 2B, which require that the dwelling should be sited on or close to the footprint of the existing dwelling, unless alternative siting is justified on the basis that's set out in the policy, and that it be no larger in size than the original dwelling or 93 square metres gross internal area, whichever is the larger. In terms of paragraph 2C of this policy, a proposed replacement dwelling should reflect the massing and scale of the original dwelling. And this is the matter where the authority fell into error when considering the proposal in March earlier this year. When having regard to this, officers considered that even though the proposed dwelling would be less than 93 square metres, due to a combination of its increased height taken together with its depth and longer form, the proposed dwelling would have a scale and mass that would not satisfactorily reflect the massing and scale of the original dwelling. Furthermore, in terms of paragraph 2D, this requires the replacement dwelling to accord with policy CES6. Now, policy CES6, amongst other things, requires that development conserves and enhances the local identity and distinctiveness of Exmoor's built and historic environment. And as set out in the report, officers consider that due to a combination of its larger scale and mass, and its more elaborate form and conspicuous appearance, the proposed dwelling would cause unacceptable harm to the scenic beauty and character of this part of the National Park landscape. Consequently, the proposal conflicts with paragraphs 2C and 2D of policy HCD 17, and as such conflicts with the policy read as a whole. In addition, because of the harm to the character and appearance of this part of the National Park landscape, the proposal conflicts with the policies of the local plan which are listed within the first recommended reason for refusal, where together these policies, amongst other things, seek high quality design in terms of design that respects and complements local character and the character and appearance of the National Park landscape, including tranquility and the dark sky experience of Exmoor National Park in the interest of users of the public rights of way. Now, in terms of these or those policies specifically, we shall run through those now. Policy CES6, which I note has been missed from the list of policies and the reason for refusal by error and should therefore be added in. This policy under clause 1 says that development proposals should deliver high quality sustainable designs that conserve and enhance the local identity and distinctiveness of Exmoor's built and historic environment. And it says under 1A that all new build development should positively contribute to its setting in terms of siting, massing, scale, height, orientation, density and layout. So the policy seeks design of sustainable construction that conserves and enhances local identity and distinctiveness of Exmoor, which is set out in the report. Officers do not consider it does. Policy GP1, amongst other things, under point 1, says that sustainable development for Exmoor National Park will conserve and enhance the national park, including its natural beauty. It says under point 3 that in achieving sustainable development, all proposals for new development will demonstrate that they are consistent with the National Park's legal purposes and duty, and requires particular attention to be paid to the impact on the character and setting of the site and or its buildings. Your officers consider the proposal, because of its overall scale, its depth and longer form, and more extensive fenestration, will lead to harm to the character and setting of the site and the natural beauty of this national park, this part of the national park. Thus, it would fail to satisfy these policies read as a whole. In terms of CES1, this requires, as well as other things, that the high quality, diverse and distinctive landscapes and seascapes of Exmoor will be conserved and enhanced, which is under point 1. It requires that under point 3, development proposals should have regard to and be appropriate in terms of impact with the conservation of significant landscapes and seascapes attributes, including the heritage coast. Policy CED1 similarly requires that development will be permitted where it can be demonstrated it's compatible with the conservation and enhancement of Exmoor's landscapes and seascapes, through ensuring that, amongst other things, the visual impact of the development in its immediate and wider setting is minimised through high quality design that reflects the local landscape character with particular regard to scale, siting, materials and colour. The policy says under point 2 that within Exmoor's Heritage Coast development should be appropriate to the coastal location and conserve the undeveloped nature of the coast consistent with Heritage Coast purposes. Your officers consider that because of its overall scale, its depth and longer form and more extensive fenestration, it would lead to harm to the character and appearance and setting of the site and harm the natural beauty of this part of the national park. In terms of policy CES2, which is concerned with protecting Exmoor's dark sky, this policy says under clause 1 that the tranquility and dark sky experience of Exmoor Dark Sky Reserve and the national park as a whole will be maintained. The application site lies in a remote area away from other built forms and sources of artificial light. Consequently, even though no external lighting is proposed, the greater potential for light spill as a result of the more extensive fenestration will lead to a greater potential for the dwelling's presence to be emphasised, particularly during winter months and darker evenings. This would erode and so fail to maintain the tranquility and dark sky experience of the national park, causing harm to its character and appearance in conflict with policy CES2 when read as a whole. Policy RTT 12 at clause 1 says that the access network will be safeguarded by ensuring that development proposals will not adversely affect the condition of the access network, users' interests and character and appearance. Whilst the proposal itself will not lead to harm to the condition of the access network, acknowledging the existing lawful use of the site, for the reasons already outlined, it would harm the scenic beauty and character of this part of the national park, and consequently it would harm the experience of users of the coast path and harm the character and appearance of the pathway through the gentrification of what is currently a plain, unassuming and modest dwelling, which is happened upon to something much larger, elaborate and eye-catching. Turning to the second reason for refusal, we know that bats use the site for foraging and commuting. It's accepted that, subject to the avoidance of external lighting, there will be no significant effect on foraging and commuting bats. However, concerns have been raised about light spill, and the authority's wildlife officer has advised that this matter requires further consideration, particularly given the sensitivity of barber still and greater and lesser horseshoe bats to light. All bats are designated and protected as Yorkshire protected species, and we should take a precautionary approach when considering the potential effect of development. In this regard, policy GP1 says under clause 1 that sustainable development for Exmoor will conserve and enhance the national park, including its wildlife as well as other things. It says development will demonstrate it is consistent with the national park legal purposes and duty, which members know includes to conserve and enhance the wildlife of the national park. Policy CES3 says under clause 1 that the conservation and enhancement of wildlife habitats and sites of geological interest will be given great weight. Under clause 3b, the policy advises that development likely to cause harm to legally protected species or lead to the loss or damage to the habitats will not be permitted unless this can be mitigated or then offset so that local populations are at least maintained. Due to the more extensive glazing and potential for light spill, on the evidence currently available, officers are not satisfied the proposal would not lead to harm to foraging and commuting bats within the vicinity of the site. And the lack of evidence in this regard leads officers to conclude the proposal would conflict with these parts of GP1 and CES3 and would conflict with these policies read as a whole. Accordingly, for these reasons, Chairman, it's recommended that Planning Permission be refused. There's two reasons given on page 6, and that in doing so, members resolve to add policy CES6 list of policies within the first reason for refusal. Moreover, Chairman, in terms of reason for refusal number 2, it should say that there is insufficient evidence to demonstrate the proposal would not cause harm to statutory protected species, rather than there is insufficient evidence to demonstrate that the proposal would have an acceptable impact. And I would ask that members also resolve to agree that members make that change to the wording for the reason for refusal. Thank you, Chairman.
Right, thank you very much, Mr. White, for that very comprehensive report. We now turn to...
Can I raise a point of order before we do that?
Yes.
Could we just read out again that change to the recommendation? That's really crucial. This is the recommendation on the file.
On number 2.
Sorry, excuse me. We've just been told that there is a change to the wording of the recommendation
Of number 2.
of number 2,
So we're
which
adding-
we were just asked to make a note of.
Indeed.
Okay,
So,
it was read out so quickly we were not able to do that.
so CES6 needs to be added to number 1, policy CES6. And Mr. White, would you just like to reflect on line 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, lines 5 and 6 of condition 2?
Yes, Chairman. Where it says there's insufficient evidence to demonstrate the proposal would have an acceptable impact, officers would change that to there is insufficient evidence to demonstrate the proposal would not cause harm to.
So on reason 2 of the recommendation, lines 5 and 6 would not cause harm to statutory protected species. Right. Okay, thank you. So we will now move to our public speakers. The first of whom is Mr. Jeff Garfield. So Mr. Garfield, if you would come to the table, please, and speak into the microphone. You will have 2 minutes from when you start to speak.
Good afternoon. My name is Jeff Garfield. I live in Porlock and I represent the South West Coast Path Association, which is a charity with over 8,000 members which supports the South West Coast Path. On behalf of the association, I wish to object to the application. Why? Because this development immediately adjacent to the coast path will cause severe detriment to this path. It's an attraction which brings a total of 9 million visitors to the southwest each year, generating £500 million worth of visitor spend and supporting 11,000 jobs. Exmoor is very fortunate. We have the iconic first section of the path, which passes Hurlstone Bungalow. 20 local businesses in Minehead and Porlock contribute to the South West Coast Path Association. So how would the development affect the coast path? It would create an adverse impact on the users of the path by replacing the unobtrusive little shed with a building twice the size and 3 times the length, contravening, as we've heard, your planning policy HCD 17. It impacts negatively on the local landscape, as we've heard, creating light spill and urbanising a peaceful landscape. And it creates real danger to the users of the path by using the existing bridleway as a road and causing conflict between vehicle movements and the users of the path. So if those aren't enough reasons to reject the application, we need to think about the stated purpose of the coast path: to conserve and enhance the natural beauty, wildlife and cultural heritage of the national park, and promote opportunities for understanding and enjoyment of this special place. This does nothing to do that, it harms them, so I ask you to reject the application. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Alford. Thank you. Our next speaker is Dorian Bickerstaff. So, Mr. Bickerstaff, you will have 2 minutes from when you start to speak. Yes, it's on. Yes.
I have lived on Exmoor since 1959 and Boddington since 1981. I remember Bob Mullis and his family, and they moved out of Hurlston Bungalow in December 2012, and not 2016 as previously stated. No one has lived in the property since, nor has it ever been used as a holiday property by Richard Robins' nephews. The bats and wildlife have been the only residents since 2012. Hurlston Bungalow is not situated in an urban area such as Blue Anchor or Minehead or even Alford, but near a tiny rural hamlet, Boddington, renowned for its tea room, distinctive walks, access to the beach and Hurlston Point. We understand the National Park Authority aims to ensure that Exmoor's local distinctiveness is maintained. We understood that the National Park Authority, due to their policies, would actually understand the importance of where we are so privileged to live, to preserve and protect, to conserve and enhance Exmoor's built heritage and its landscape, and protect us from overdevelopment. The understanding of the concept of size and mass being similar is fundamental in this replacement build application. Strong feeling has been fueled by the insistence that an elongated multi-step much higher building is modest and fits in with the area. We disagree. It may be a modest design in Blue Anchor and Minehead, but it is replacing a small square relocated bothy in a wooded area beside an unmade track, a building that, if repaired, would continue to look placed for generations. There is no escaping, due to the shape of the design put forward, that this is visually a much larger, more extravagant, more visible, out of character building. It does not echo or maintain the local distinctive build style or even the bungalow it is replacing, which has its own modest character and amazing history. So where is the similarity of size and massing, we are asking of the committee? The implied limits of the rebuild policy of size and massing are being challenged by the applicant. We understand similar size and mass must mean this. I'd just like to say, outside of the planning considerations, it has been if there has been unpleasantness directed personally towards the applicant due to the strong feeling, this is a sad reflection of today's society. I am just hoping that due and fair process is followed. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bickerstaff. Our next speaker is Mrs. Penelope Callum. Mrs. Callum, if you could come to the microphone, please, and then you will have 2 minutes from when you start to speak.
The local community remain extremely concerned about this entirely incongruous proposed development, which would have a hugely adverse impact on the character and visual amenity of the area. As the proposal represents an overdevelopment of a very sensitive site, local interest is very high. Many more local residents would be here today to express their concerns were it not holiday time. Many supported CPRE financially in their legal challenge. We strongly object to the massing and scale of the proposed property, the impact on the landscape character and heritage coast, the impact on the South West Coast Path, the impact on flora and fauna, and the impact on the Dark Sky Reserve. We, together with the National Trust, CPRE, South West Coast Path, Exmoor National History Society, and your own planning officer, wildlife officer, and future landscape officers, remain sure that this proposal does not comply with the planning policies laid out to protect Exmoor National Park. The proposed building is very clearly not similar in scale and mass to the original dwelling. The western frontage alone would increase from 40 square metres to 96 square metres. Officers consider that the proposal does not satisfactorily represent the massing and scaling of the original dwelling. We agree. Officers consider that the proposal would cause unacceptable harm to the scenic beauty and character of this part of the National Park landscape. We agree. The proposed building has greater than 4 times the area of fenestration. Officers consider that it would be contrary to the National Planning Policy Framework's objectives for the protection of biodiversity and the conservation of the national environment. We wholeheartedly agree. Isn't it time to trust the expertise in the room? We appeal to your duty as members of the Planning Committee to accede to the expert technical opinions offered by your officers. Please refuse this application. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Callum. Our next speaker is Dr. Ian Callum. Dr. Callum, you'll have 2 minutes from when you start to speak.
Thank you.
This application goes back over a very long period of time. We've followed all of the various changes, the withdrawal and the resubmission with almost identical plans throughout. In October 23, there was an officer report which was withdrawn before the committee, which was factually incorrect. Mr. Spears, its author, apologised to our public meeting attended by over 100 local residents. He said his computer system failed to pull across any objections to the development. Importantly, that report and all previous discussions with officers were based on incorrect measurements of the existing building, and that error was only corrected in February 2024, when the size presented of the existing building was reduced by 33%. Therefore, the only officer who has been able to compare the original and proposed development side by side is Mr. White. The concerns are about scale and massing, and the height of the building is crucial to that calculation, especially when we're talking about whether the two are similar. I contend that the two are not similar in scale and massing. The increased height of the proposed building is a choice the applicant has based on a type of roofing material. He could choose a different material and thus reduce the proposed height of the building. Likewise, the proposed building has over 4 times the fenestration compared with the existing building, and even with conditions, the excess light spill will be significant. It's also the applicant's choice to have floor-to-ceiling glazing. It could be changed, as suggested by the National Parks Wildlife Officer, but hasn't been altered. I conclude that it's the applicant's choice of design that was caused the scale, massing and fenestration issues. I would recommend the committee to refuse the application to allow for a more appropriate proposal to come forward. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Dr. Callum. Our next speaker is Susan Bamford.
Oh, is that me?
Yes.
Sorry, Susan Bamford. Did you say me?
Yes.
I'm happy.
Would you mind coming forward?
I'm happy for Alexandra Simpson to speak on my behalf.
She hasn't been registered to speak.
Because I'm not feeling too well.
Okay. Well, under the circumstances, we will allow your sentiments to be expressed by the other speaker.
Thank you. Thank
Okay.
you.
Thank you. So if you would come forward to the microphone, please. You will have 2 minutes when you start to speak.
Thank you. So I appeal to you as human beings and not so much as a committee, please, to hear my plea. I've been walking this coast path for 30 years, this particular path. It is a place of deep spiritual significance, the land and the well-being that it invokes and inspires in everyone who visits it. I remember Richard, who used to live in the bungalow, and I would often talk to him. And I remember one particular conversation where I asked about the sensitivity of the landscape and his dwelling, and how it was even possible that he could live there. He assured me that one of those reasons was due to the access. He used a Land Rover of small proportions, the old-fashioned kind, with a trailer. He was a do-it-yourself man. He didn't have contractors coming in and doing the work for him. And whenever I walked on that path, either alone or with my dog, it was never felt a disturbance if his Land Rover rattled past me. I am concerned, please, on the behalf of my neighbours, the land and this fragile ecosystem, that the access to this proposed development will be altered in such a way that it will impose and disrupt and destroy what is an fragile ecosystem. We've already heard from the southwest coast paths that thousands of people enjoy this route. There is limited access across an old bridge. From Bossington, it sweeps upward underneath the bend of the hill, and it is not meant for heavy machinery. Richard carried out his repairs himself, and I propose that this development will require heavy machinery, more materials, and that it is not in keeping with what we as guardians of this land have been requested to do under natural sovereign law. This is not about legal law.
Thank you very much. You have nearly 2.5 minutes, so thank you for bringing your remarks to a close. Thank you. Thank you very much. Our next speaker is Fletcher Robinson, who is speaking on behalf of the CPRE. So, Mr. Robinson, if you come to the microphone, you'll have 2 minutes from when you start to speak.
Thank you. Well, we think that residents and walkers who love the national coastal parks should be able to rely on the ordinary meaning of the words in such a major policy as the replacement buildings policy. The applicant has circulated a last-minute technical note to committee members. That note tries to argue that the word massing has a completely different meaning from the accepted one in the Town and Country Planning Act, Development Management Order 2015. We note that it doesn't refer at all to the second building, which is plainly also part of the massing. It also claims that building regulations require that all dwellings should have steeply pitched roofs. If that were true, then flat roofs would be banned. It also justifies the proposed height on the basis that a particular type of tile has been chosen. But that's an irrelevance in this context. There is also a last-minute legal opinion saying that councillors have, quote, a degree of flexibility, but the opinion carefully avoids saying how much, as it doesn't refer to a range of common dictionary definitions of the word similar, such as nearly identical but not quite, or matching or same. These are all relevant. Case law allows some limited flexibility with these kinds of policy to allow planning judgment to play a part. Of course it does. But how much flexibility is reasonable in the highly sensitive context of the national coastal path in a designated landscape? We see the figure 10 to 15% mentioned in one of the legal cases, but 100% increase in frontage is now proposed. How can that comply with the scale and massing requirement? Our barrister says that the intention of the policy is, quote, abundantly clear, unquote, that the new building should be similar in scale and massing to the one which it replaces. We trust that members will agree. Let's see a building come forward with similar scale and massing in a new planning application.
Right, thank you very much, Mr. Robinson. Our next speaker is Sarah Shorten. And Ms. Shorten is having 5 minutes because she is speaking on behalf of a number of people. So Ms. Shorten, you'll have 5 minutes when you start to speak.
So I've been asked to speak for a group of over 100 households in Bossington and wider Porlock Vale communities opposed to this application. I hope you will listen to what we have to say, because to date, in large part, we have felt disregarded. Last year we had to intervene at the 11th hour to draw the committee's attention to critical omissions and inaccuracies in the report written by Andrea Spears, Joe White's predecessor in this case. This report was withdrawn and the recommendation to support the application was withdrawn, and in his most recent report Mr White clearly states no weight should be attached to it. At the last committee meeting, our concerns regarding due consideration of scale and massing and detrimental landscape impact were brushed aside. We are relieved the park conceded the decision made was flawed. We now look to the committee to properly determine whether the proposed scheme complies with replacement dwelling policy. Our group has stayed the course because we are deeply concerned about the impact of the scheme on what is a much-loved, fragile site. What is decided today impacts the location in perpetuity. Given this application involves 52 documents submitted by the applicant, 113 responses from the community and consultees, 3 officer reports that have been written, a move by the CPRE to apply for judicial review and a resulting consent order, is it not time to take greater heed of the expert guidance provided by your officer, Joe White? More so, we'd go so far as to say, without the value of a site visit or having stood in front of the existing bungalow, any councillor without physical knowledge of the site might be encouraged to abstain or to defer to Joe White's recommendation. To the single issue of scale and massing, today you will be asked to make a rational, informed decision about the following. Does the scale and massing of the proposed replacement dwelling reflect that of the original? Is it similar? We've prepared drawings using the applicant's plan, and here are some metrics. The existing bungalow's west elevation is 40 square metres. The replacement is 96, more than double. This is critical because the west elevation abuts the southwest coast path. In fact, is elevated above it, so that each and every user of the path, the only way to the access to location, will be overlooked by a building seemingly twice its size, similar or different. The height of the roof ridges of all the 4 steps of the proposed building are greater than that of the existing bungalow. These height differences range from 0.8 metres to 1.8 metres. These differences are critical, given the existing building ridge is only 3.7 metres in height, an additional 1.8 at the highest point on top of that. Ratios. The existing bungalow is essentially a square building. Its length to width ratio is 1.3 to 1. The proposed dwelling has a ratio of 3.2 to 1. Similar or different? We've used frontage, height and ratio to demonstrate just how widely the two buildings differ in terms of scale. As for massing, defined as how the bulk of a building is shaped into form, from the applicant's drawings we calculate the building's mass would increase from 250 cubic square metres to 450 cubic square metres, almost doubling in mass. Add 95 cubic metres for the new build shed. This is relevant. If we think of massing as Lego blocks, the applicant proposes putting considerably more of them on site. And as to where they are placed and how they are stacked, do they or do they not reflect the original? Similar or different? If you feel the answer is no, we urge you to refuse the application so an alternative design might come forward. We've chosen not to lobby you. Despite all of the difficulties our community has faced, we still trust in the fairness and rigour of the planning process. So we repeat, if you find the scale and massing of the proposed replacement building to be dissimilar, the application does not comply with policy and must be refused. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Walton. Our next speaker is the applicant, Mr. Carew. So, Mr. Carew, you have 5 minutes from when you start to speak.
My family and I hugely appreciate the time and effort members have taken. It deeply saddens us that the committee should be challenged in this way. My wife and I instructed a highly respected barrister and planning advisor to provide opinions on the application. Both concur that the proposal is within planning policy. This application is a matter of judgment for the committee and not the court. The court will only interfere with such judgment where the judgment reached is so unreasonable that no reasonable decision maker would have reached this decision. This is an exceptionally high bar. You have the power to make this judgment, and any judicial review on your judgment would be immediately quashed by the court. Of course, you can come to the decision that this proposal does reflect the scale and massing of the existing bungalow. Both the existing proposed buildings are single-storey, 3-bedroom houses massed in a rectilinear oblong shape with a pitched roof. Furthermore, all of the previous planning officers were supportive of this application, and as you remember, a recommendation to approve planning was made in the September 2023 officer report. The officer concluded, the proposed design and scale are acceptable and in accordance with local plan policy, and that it is of similar scale, and that it would be in accordance with policy CES 6. The relevant policy does not state that a replacement dwelling should exactly replicate the massing and scale of the original dwelling. A replacement dwelling can be larger, but still reflect the massing and scale. The increase in gross internal floor area is only 18%, or 12 square metres. It's about the size of a small bedroom. This is clearly not the vast overdevelopment touted by the CPRE. Even if a judgment was reached that the proposal is not policy compliant, you are still within your rights to grant permission based on material considerations. Firstly, in order to replace the existing asbestos tiles with traditional tiles, building regulations dictate a steeper roof pitch. Traditional tiles were required by the parks in a pre-application meeting, so that is just something we've responded to. Secondly, the exterior walls need to be thicker to accommodate insulation for thermal regulations. Thirdly, the site is so narrow that any increase in size is not possible in any other direction other than lengthways. Lastly, any replacement dwelling must be larger in order to comply with national space standards. The current building is non-compliant. These are not outrageous planning demands, they are baseline mandatory regulations. What would the point be to only allow for a replacement dwelling so small as to make it unfit for habitation? In regards to light spill, I note that neither the Environment Agency nor the ecologists who undertook the various ecology impact surveys ever raised light spill as a concern. There will be no significant light spill from inside, and there will be no external lighting whatsoever. We have always offered to provide a detailed light assessment, but Mrs. Spears said we were not able to submit one. There is evidence to demonstrate there would be no harm to protected species. This is contained in the Ecology Report and the Environment Agency's statement. If required, a planning condition can be made to guarantee no light spill, and there are a number of options we'd be happy to accept, as we are big supporters of the dark skies. All of this would be a material improvement on the existing house with light spill. Conditions such as light tinted glass, as proved before, automated blackout blinds, as recommended by the Parks Wildlife Officer to prevent any light spill whatsoever, or smart glass would automatically turn on at dusk by sending an electrical current. Conditions requiring technical equipment are commonplace and enforceable. For example, those requiring electrical air source heat pumps for sustainability purposes, or those requiring air conditioning units to shut off at certain times to prevent noise. In all these cases, equipment may fail on rare occasions, but that does not render those conditions unenforceable. It simply means that repair work is required. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Carew. Is Mrs. Carew here?
Yes.
Mrs. Harriet Carew.
Okay, good.
Thank you, Mrs. Carew. So our next speaker is Mrs. Harriet Carew, who will have 2 minutes from when she starts to speak.
We were over the moon after you approved our application 2-1 in the March meeting, and were devastated to hear about the judicial review put forward by the CPRE. CPRE's stated aims include building support for rural affordable housing, brownfield development, and sustainable development. This project is on a brownfield site, provides family housing at a time of national shortage, and will be built as an exemplar of sustainable, low-carbon design. The project is therefore wholly aligned with CPRE's stated aims. Why have they picked on us and this small plan for a bungalow? The CPRE have also written misleading articles wrongly stating that the committee only approved it by a small majority, and also describing Ivo as a London-based architect, without mentioning that Ivo's family have always lived on Exmoor, and we lived in Porlock Weir until only recently. It is a sad state of affairs when a large charitable body spends time and money going after a local family seeking to sensitively rebuild a dilapidated bungalow with a traditional and sustainable design. We have tried everything to satisfy all sides. This has been a real juggling act. We have amended the application numerous times in line with planning officer's advice, and have made several compromises, such as moving the parking as requested and amending the size of the bungalow. The plan presented to you today was not drawn up in isolation, but drawn up after a lengthy collaboration with the Parks planning officers over 2.5 years, and after countless hours spent discussing the design. And as you remember, the plan was recommended for approval before the first committee meeting that was cancelled with 2 hours' notice. We hope that you will come to the same conclusion that you did last time and vote to grant us planning permission so that we can live in our home.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Carew. And our final speaker is Mrs. Laura Carew. So, Mrs. Carew, you will have 2 minutes from when you start to speak.
We are really sorry that this application has given you so much trouble. We want to thank you for all your patience and support. In their press release, the CPRE states the Planning Committee voted to approve the replacement building by a small majority. 10 to 5 is not a small majority. The CPRE should not be putting out falsehoods, and in my opinion, they should not be questioning the National Park, who are our much valued custodians for this part of rural England, but do not have their huge resources. All around us, damaging and inappropriate development seem to go unchecked, while they mysteriously focus on the tiny wooden bungalow. Not a bad development, as they call it, but a sensitive reworking of a modest building that will and must remain modest, not gentrified, as part of its aesthetic. The plan is for a high-quality, low-carbon, sustainable home in line with policy CES6, in the same style as the original house, with a pitched tile roof and timber windows. The stepped form breaks the volume and was recommended by a previous planning officer. The current dwelling at 66 square metres is now below the national minimum space standards, and the refurbishment includes a very modest size increase of only 12 square metres. Disappointingly, the CPRE Somerset's objections appear to reiterate unsubstantiated rumours that have circulated on social media without bothering to check the facts. Public statements that the house was never intended to be a permanent dwelling are quite untrue. Hurlston Bungalow is a freehold dwelling with deeds that go back to the 1920s. It has almost always been lived in, and most recently it is by a young family. It is not a shed or a bothy. The CPE states that the track to the house should not be used by vehicles, but the bungalow has legal rights. And finally, they suggest, quite absurdly, that Hurlston Bungalow is i.e. someone's private house, should be demolished because of their preference for no house at all there. This is unworthy of a charitable body.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Carew. So that concludes public speaking for this item. We will move straight on to member debate. So, are there any members who would like to start? Please, Mr. Gein.
It's on a question of fact, Chairman. Is it a bridleway or something different? We said it was a bridleway. Is it a bridleway or a road?
Mr. White.
Chairman, it's a public footpath. It's a track over which the coast path passes.
But is it? It's not a road.
It's not a road, no.
Mrs. Nicholson.
Can I, however, check that while it's a public footpath, there are private vehicular access rights? Is that correct?
As I understand, the existing property has vehicle access.
Can I come back, Mr. Chairman? Yes. I'm interested in this word bothy. There's a dwelling there.
It's not a word I've used, Chairman.
Sorry, I used that word. Okay.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bickerstaff.
No problem.
Mrs. Nicholson, I'm assuming you're reserving your right to come back and speak later.
If I may, but first of all, I would like to apologise if I misheard Mr. White. I understood him to use the word bothy, and if I misheard, and I'm very sorry.
I don't think Mr. White did,
Okay,
and
so
he
that was my
certainly
mistake.
have not intended to. Right, so points of information dealt with. Mr. Gein.
Sorry,
Or do you have another
just
one?
one more, Chairman. It's about definition.
Mm-hmm.
Is there sort of a definition that is used or a series of definitions that are used in the National Park Plan that we can go to and say if a word is used it's based on Collins Dictionary or the Oxford English Dictionary? I just wonder where, if we're talking about different definitions of a word which has been brought up.
Yeah, exactly what are you questioning, Mr. Gein?
Sorry, what
definition of?
There's been it's been brought up. What does similar mean? And obviously, somebody said there are different definitions, which of course there are. I just wondered if in the plan uses a particular standard of English.
Okay, thank you. This actually is an interesting legal point. I'll ask Mr. Leader to comment.
can we just take a nice simple approach? The interpretation of policy is a matter of law, and one uses, generally speaking, dictionary definition, common parlance, common sense. The application of policy is a matter of planning judgment. Now, turning to the interpretation of policy, a policy cannot mean whatever you want it to mean. It's not Humpty Dumpty, to quote a leading case. My advice to you is this: accept your officer's interpretation of policy. Do not try as a committee to make a policy mean what you want it to mean. Mr. White will explain what the policy means. My strong advice is that you take his advice. But when it comes to applying that policy, well then that's a matter for your judgment. I hope that approach will assist members, because otherwise I fear we may get ourselves into difficulties. So Mr. White will tell you what the policy means. If you ask him, you apply it, having regard to the facts that are before you.
Heaven forfend that we get into difficulties. So, I have got Mr. Bray.
Can I just check a point
Yes.
of fact?
Another point of fact, yes?
In the current report, Joe, on page 3, refer to the dwellings being 1.66 metres high, higher than, but you mentioned 1.5 earlier on. It is 1.6 higher, 1.66, as you mentioned in the most recent report.
Yeah, Chairman, the earlier report talked about being more than 1.5, precisely 1.66.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Right, are we clear there are no more points of fact? In which case, Mr. Relson, I think you were the first person who indicated that they actually wanted to speak in the debate.
Okay, thank you. I might break this down a bit, depending upon how it goes, and other members might want to come in on certain issues. First thing to say, of course, is to clarify that whilst we've discussed this before and came to a vote and a decision at that time, I've, with other members, approached this afresh and started from scratch in terms of to look at all the details and all the information once again. And that's just one of the speakers mentioned. That's a lot of information. And that's been a very interesting process. And I really sympathise with a lot of the comments that came out earlier from what the public was saying, because it seems to me that the essence of this, in a large extent, comes down to HCD 17, the replacement dwellings policy, because, of course, why is there a replacement dwellings policy? Why does HCD 17 exist? It is basically to manage change. It's to manage change when change is inevitable. The policy is there to try and find a way to work out how that change can happen on an existing site that's already a developed site, a brownfield site, in a way that will not basically cause undue harm. And that's the word that's mentioned in the officer's report about what is harmful. And in that, we accept that one of the reasons why this complies is because the current dwelling has an adverse impact on the character and visual amenity of the area. Undoubtedly it does. I mean, not just from the look of it, it's a wreck. It is unworthy of the area. It is not something we would put on the front page of our brochure to advertise Exmoor. It's not something we would think would attract visitors to the area. Furthermore, it is, of course, what a photograph won't tell you is because of the presence of asbestos. It is particularly something that we don't want to see. So, it complies with that. We know it's on basically at the same place as the existing dwelling. We know that we've covered the issue of the area, the 93 square metre rule. This goes from 66 to 78, so it's well within that. And then we get to this massing and scale. This is a 3D object, right? But of course our policy refers to a two-dimensional area. So that's the first issue. So when we talk about area, we have an objective way of measuring that. It'd be very simple. If it was more than 93 square metres, well, that would be job done. But of course, when it comes to the massing and scale, we do not have that objective measurement. We do not have a way of saying, oh, well, it's this is the aspect ratio, or this is the ratio of the depth to the width, and therefore. It doesn't work that way. This comes down to judgment. It comes down to a judgment of what reflects the massing and scale. And I also want to be clear, because we've been using similar and reflect interchangeably. The word similar is used in the preamble to the policy. The policy itself uses the word reflect. Therefore, that is a different word. We don't want to get bogged down in dictionary definitions, but that is a different word. How you reflect something, how one reflects the idea, reflect a feeling or reflect a manifestation of something. We won't get into that now. But I want to come back to it. I think we will in discussion come back to it, because simply to say, having gone through this, I believe everything springs from the massing and scale. Many of the other things here and the other policies that are referred to are only in conflict with that policy to the extent that that massing and scale issue is accepted as something that is unacceptable. Okay? So, for instance, the reference to CES6 is here, what we're saying here is the reference there is a call with the design and sustainable construction requirements of policy CES6. Well, this is a reference to basically the design principles involved. All new build development should positively contribute to the setting in terms of siting, massing, scale, height, etc. So in this one, it's not saying it needs to reflect anything, it just needs to positively contribute. Well, again, that's our judgment. Well, earlier we saw the artist's impression. And we can go back, I think it's slide 26, I think. And so, well, comparing the top picture to the bottom picture, is that a positive contribution compared to the bottom picture? That's one way of looking at it. So therefore, I'm not convinced, therefore, it does conflict with CES6 from that point of view. We then got this reference to the stepped roof design. And it's interesting that in some places that stepped roof design is seen as a positive, as an attribute, really, of good design. And yet here it's also seen as something that is contributing to that sense of outsized massing and scale. Well, how can it be both? And this is something that I find confusing. There's this issue, well, should it have been a pitched roof? Well, the pre-application process apparently told us that that was suggested, and the step form breaks up the volume. So if something had gone back to our HCD 17 within this policy, if it had gone up to 93 square metres, and had not gone for the step design, had not gone for the breaking up of the roof in that way, and also the shadows that are created by basically having parts of it step back that way, it would present actually quite a large facade, even if it was no higher than the existing building. So I find it interesting that the design decisions that have been made can either be interpreted to mean they're doing what is necessary to comply with CES6, to break up massing and scale with a good design, whilst also ensuring it complies with HCD 17. But again, that's for the judgment of the members in order to do. But one thing here is this issue of the developed site, because I think it's something we mentioned last time, we need to come back to again. This is a brownfield site. Okay, brownfield site is, accepted definition is, it's land that has previously had stuff built on it or has been altered by human activity. That's the definition of a brownfield site. I want to say ground there because that's from the CPRE. So that's the CPRE definition of a brownfield site, and I don't think there's any suggestion here that this doesn't comply with that. And yet we also have this issue that what we have is this sits within a countryside, a locality that is experiences a lack of built development. Again, it's a dictionary definition, I don't mean lack in terms of a shortage of something or the absence of something. Well, I don't think we mean the shortage of something. I think we're saying there should be more built development here. So we obviously don't mean the absence either, because of course there is built development here, because this is a brownfield site. So again, once we get to CES1 and CED1, this issue that we're trying to in there say, well, it can't happen because this is an undeveloped site and in this locality is undeveloped, I don't think that sits with policy HCD 17, which again is designed to help within the local plan for a replacement building to get built if there is one that is already there. So that's, I think, as far as I want to go at the moment, just to see, well, I've got some other points to make about other policies, but I think from this stage I just wanted to see whether we could come to a kind of a discussion around an acceptance that it is a developed site and what we mean by the massing and scale of what would be basically envisaged by HCD 17 for a replacement dwelling.
Okay, thank you. So you're reserving your right to come back at a later stage. We'll see how the debate goes, but yes, thank you. Any other member wish to speak, please? Mr. Bray? Your hand?
Yes, just coming back on a point which Dominic has said regarding the word similar. I thought that word is crucial. And the discussion we just had, been led to believe it is important, so I don't think we should dismiss it. And similar or reflect, I mean, we talked about legal definition of it, and I was thinking about it this morning. You know, I'm 5'10". Am I similar to a 6'2" person? I'm not. That's a 10% increase. So, as an engineer, I like trying to put numbers to things. But I think we're also helped when you look at the dimension of this property. We've now been told it's 1.6 metres higher than a smaller bungalow. That height increase means it isn't similar. It can't be that much higher and be similar, or reflect the original property. I'm just going by the figures we've been given. It's 9 metres longer than the existing property, which is only 9.9 metres long. That's from the planning statement. That's a 90% increase in length. That can't be similar, or reflect. So, and then we talk about massing, as been mentioned. Massing means three-dimensional, doesn't it? And when you start with three-dimensional, you put height, length. The design has made this building longer than need be, which increase is the frontage. It could be wider, but it's made it longer. So that means that the frontage is increased. And we've heard different figures here. But to me, the increase has got to be around 80 to 100%. Again, I don't see how they can be similar or even reflect. I just don't see how we can then say, okay, that's a similar building. I support a building there of similar mass and scale. But this is, through design, made longer. The stepping, I don't believe, helps. I know maybe there's an interpretation on that. The length of it, the cubic size of it has increased substantially. We heard some figures here today of 100% increase. I was coming up a figure about 55% increase. Whether it's 55% increase or 100% increase in massing, that cannot be similar. Again, that's through design. The design could make it more similar to it was and come up with a good dwelling which could be used. I'm not sure it's ideal for a family. That's another matter, and I think the people who were there before moved out because they felt it wasn't appropriate. But that's almost irrelevant to planning. So again, going back to the word similar, I think it's got to be important. And when you look at the dimensions, as an engineer, I look at use of dimensions, I just cannot see those dimensions being similar. And they are all through choices in the design process. I hear they liaised with planning officers, but not the current planning officers. So I think a lot of those through design decisions, we talked about and we heard about light spillage and technical ways coming up. In fact, heat pumps were used as a way, as an example of technical solutions. We're actually hearing now a lot of heat pumps are breaking down, so it's perhaps not a good example of technical solutions. An easier solution is to reduce the size of the windows. But of course, that wouldn't provide us good views from the property. So yeah, going back, I think a similar thing, which is why I'm picking up on what Dominic said, I think it's got to be an important word, and perhaps we need clarification. Is it important, or is it just reflective? Then going on to about the developed or undeveloped nature of the site. I don't, you went to the site visit, I think, Dominic, but that area, to call it a brownfield site is injustice. I know technically it perhaps is. It's very undeveloped. I've been going up and down Paulet Tow Road many times, not to mention. In Paulet Tow Road, you look down that area, it is undeveloped. To call it anything else would be injustice. It's not, it's not Blue Anchor, it's not mined. This is an undeveloped area. Okay, there's a small wooden bungalow which is there, tucked away, but the new structure will be far more visible and make it far more developed. So I think, in my view, it is, as the report says, predominantly natural, undeveloped setting of the remote site. And again, if that's what the professional officer is saying, I would concede to that. And from my experience of the area, I very much support that. The stepping, again, the professional officer's view is, stepping makes the presence and actually visual jarring greater. Goes on to also talk about the combined appearance of the bungalow, the elaborate design and substantial scale on the site will more noticeably impact the coastal footpath views. I also add to that the views from the Paulet Tow Road. So you look right down and you really get a bird's eye view of it. So, yeah, I struggle why we should forget the word similar. and I think it's really important, and I do see it as an undeveloped area, as has been clarified, I think, by the officer. I'd also like to come back as well, Steve.
Thank you. No, that's fine. In the interest of transparency and open debate, we'll allow a free flow of conversation. I will ask Mr. Lee to come back a little while later on this issue of the word similar, reflect. But I'll take some more speakers in the meantime. So I've firstly got Mrs. Nicholson and then Dr. Kelly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It was on the similar reflective question. I think I hope I'm right in thinking that it is the wording in the policy that is preeminent. I will be told about that in a minute. And just for one, we're in danger of getting terribly bogged down in slightly stuff-fine stuff. But I think when the word, I think the natural meaning, and I again would hope our advisor will would of reflect in this context would be reflective of rather than a mirror image. But again, our advisor will tell us. The policy on replacement dwellings allows for an increase in size up to 93 square metres. So it is envisaged that it is possible to have something which is larger in numbers terms that is reflective of, or we could not have that in the policy. I think that's quite important. I have been in a number of minds at various points over this application since at the last meeting and at this one. And I continue to be so, but I was very interested in the slide which Dominic Elson referred to, where the stepped roof gives a picture of small dwellings. No, the artist's impression particularly, because that's the point where you see along, you look at the very four square existing building, and the impression of a set of small buildings. And I think that that's something which both doesn't reflect any dramatic change and does produce something that sits more comfortably. That's my view at the moment. I wait to hear further. In terms of light source, we always to pay attention to that. But I also understand that something which can be conditioned should not be used as a reason for turning something down. And I hear, and again we'll hear what's said, that things that could be conditioned. Now, I think at the moment that's as far as I want to go. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Nicholson. Dr. Kelly, you're the next person to call my own.
Yes, rather like the other speakers, I'll probably reserve the right to come back, Chairman, on this one. But let's look at this particular issue regarding scale. I mean, we all know the starting point for our decisions today. We are responsible for those decisions. It's a mandatory requirement that those decisions be made in accordance with the development plan. And we've got the development plan policies made very clearly, read out to everyone today. And that application of policy cannot be on the basis of reading the policies in question in any other manner other than they are written. So the professional officers arrived at an evidence-based and objective assessment, and this view has been shared by a number of internal expert consultees and external consultants as well. And we can't set those aside. We've heard from the National Trust, the Natural History Society, South West Coast Park, CPRE, and of course our own officers, including the landscape officer and ecologist. So those cannot easily be set aside. And I would make the point, I was one of the few members at the site visit, so I have seen the site, and we have assessed it on site. I believe, Mr. Chairman, there were only 5 of us that attended the site meeting, but I was one of the few at that site meeting, so I do have a very good understanding of this particular proposal. I think also we must set aside any reliance on the September 23 report. That carries no weight. It was a flawed report. The planning statements that are being made here today place great reliance on that September report. It carries no weight. And we need to be clear about that. And I think we've got to be sensible and not look at some sophistry here. We're looking at what's a sensible dictionary understanding of the policy in question. So in terms of scale, it's clear, is it not, at least to my mind, if we go back to what the officer has said, and I believe one of the speakers as well, we've got the proposed dwelling being more than 9 metres longer, it's 1.6 metres higher, and its massing has increased from 250 cubic metres to 450 cubic metres, and that's excluding the 93 cubic metres of the outbuilding. Now, it seems a sensible reading of that is it's clearly not of the same scale or similar in scale to what we have on site. So I just wanted to make that absolutely clear. In my mind, and I have had some experience of similar applications over many years, we cannot rely on an argument that it's similar in scale and reflects the relevant part of the policy in question. I'll leave it there for now, Chair.
Right, thank you very much, Dr. Kelly. I think at this point I will ask Mr. Leader to comment on the interpretation of some of the words in the policy.
Shall I see if I can help? And if you don't think I have helped, I'll ask Mr. White to sort it out. Right, to recap, we are not construing a statute and we are not interpreting a contract. We are interpreting a policy, which is perhaps a less demanding, in a sense, thing to do. And we are looking for the ordinary, natural meaning of the words used in the policy, and we are employing some common sense. Now, with that in mind, one other sort of preliminary point, which is this: it is the words of the policy we are construing, but we are entitled to look at the written justification to the policy as we undergo that exercise. So the word of the policy that you've all been focusing on is reflect, but we know that the word similar is used in the written justification. Why might that be? Well, what does reflect mean? Well, it probably means something along the lines in this context of embody or represent. But it can't mean embody or represent exactly. And we know that because if we look at the policy itself and paragraph 2b, paragraph 2b admits a replacement dwelling which could be quite a bit larger than the original dwelling, because whilst there's an upper size limit, there's no lower size limit. There is no restriction on the amount by which a dwelling may increase in size up to that 93 square metres maximum. So when we're thinking about reflect, it doesn't mean, can't mean, reflect exactly, embody exactly, represent exactly that which is there, because otherwise 2b wouldn't really make a lot of sense. So with that in mind, to think about the word similar that we've seen in the written justification, I think that reinforces the view that when one asks the question, well, what does reflect mean? Does it mean exactly, or is there some latitude? Well, there must be latitude. Now, latitude as to what? Well, scale and massing. Well, what is scale? Well, scale is height, width, and length. There are three components to that particular factor, and you are entitled to flex them all if you want to when asking yourself the question, well, is what we are being offered going to reflect what is there? And then when we consider the question of massing, well, what is massing? How is it different from scale? Well, as members have noted, massing is all about the three-dimensional form. And that's perhaps quite an elusive concept, but it's one that you grapple with in a common sense way in your capacity decision makers. So it boils down to this. I hope I've explained tolerably clearly what the policy means, the key words that you've been focusing on. Your enviable task, glad you're doing it, is to think about, well, does what is proposed, broadly speaking, reflect, is it similar, if you like, to that which is there, bearing in mind it doesn't have to be the same. Now, there are many colourful epithets that have been coined by the courts to describe what is meant by unreasonable. You were given one earlier, I'll give you another. The decision maker must have taken leave of their senses. The reason for saying that is that you do not have unlimited, unbounded discretion, but you do have considerable discretion. But what you need to be able to do is explain in sensible, cogent terms why you think something is as it is. So you can't take flights of fancy, you cannot take leave of your senses, but in applying the policy, that's what you're here to do, you're here to apply the policy. You do have a fair degree of discretion, but you've got to be able to explain how it is you've exercised it, and somebody reviewing it, if it's the court, in due course, has to be able to say, yeah, that was within the reasonable scope of your discretion. I hope that helps. I don't think I can take it any further than that.
Thank you very much, Mr. Leader. Well, for thinking about sensible and cogent discussion, my next speaker is Mrs. Smith.
I think I've still got my senses. I think we should, I've written this down in a training session previously, depart from policy, but condition the approval to either have shutters or specialist glazing or similar to reduce the light spill. And the fact that there is a dwelling there, we need to take into consideration we do have to replace the asbestos tiles, we do have to think about insulation of how buildings are nowadays, and also space sizes which are regulatory and decided for us. So I would be happy to do that, but my main concern, or my other concern, is the use of the track and the frequency of the use of that track, because I think that is also part of the impact on this dwelling and the use of it as a family home. So if I could have a bit more practical information, was there a travel, not a travel plan, but has there been someone put forward how many times they think this track is going to be used? Not necessarily in the building, because you're going to have disruption wherever you build any property, but I think once it becomes a family home, are there going to be lots of vehicle movements that could impact on people using the coastal path?
Right. Mr. White, am I correct in assuming that because this actually is deemed to be still a dwelling, there is no restriction on the number of vehicle movements that could take place to and from it as it currently stands?
Chairman, essentially, the site has a lawful use as a single dwelling house. The proposal is for a single dwelling house. So in terms of traffic movements, planning terms, we don't anticipate there to be a material change in terms of what could happen. The original report, Chairman, which is in the papers, page 40 is probably most relevant. Halfway down, sets out why the access is just to be acceptable.
Okay, thank you. Right, thank you, Mrs. Smith. Mr. Petrinos.
Thanks. Clearly the decision, in my mind, on this depends upon the comparison of mass and scale between the proposal and the existing. I just want to make sure that I'm comparing the right things with each other. I've, in my mind, been comparing the existing bungalow, but not including the garage permission from 2002, with the proposed dwelling plus the outbuilding. So the two buildings at the top compared to the one building at the bottom. Is that right? Am I correct?
Chairman, in essence, the policy itself talks about the scale and mass of the original dwelling. So on that basis, we're looking at the dwelling here versus the dwelling there. In terms of the impact of the development overall on character and appearance, obviously we're considering the development as a whole.
Sorry, so does the outbuilding, should that be considered to contribute to the scale and mass of the development or not?
It would,
Yeah.
because it's part of the development scheme. Okay, but I think in terms of the whole proposal is the dwelling and an outbuilding. That's what's in front of us. Okay. When we're looking at scale and mass, the policy is clear that we're looking at the original dwelling. Okay. Compared to the proposed dwelling. What Mr. Leeds just hopefully pointed out is, I mean, it's in the papers, but the garage in itself, the extant garage, isn't there. So it's not part of the consideration as such in terms of baseline, but it would form a material plan consideration, if you like, is a fallback. So something that sits in the background that may have a factor.
And if I may then just to be quite clear, that garage has not been built, but the planning permission is still extant.
It is, Chairman. The permission was granted over 20 years ago, but the hard standing for the garage is gone in.
So therefore it's commenced planning.
Permission, yes.
Okay.
Yes. Just to be absolutely clear, if one is applying policy HCD17, 2B requires you to consider whether the proposed replacement dwelling would be no larger in size than the original dwelling. Right. The garage has not been built. Therefore, it is not part of the original dwelling. Therefore, you will not be comparing the dwelling with the garage for purposes of applying 2B. But you will have in mind the fact, as another material consideration, that the garage is capable of being built. And so that when you make your decision and take a rounded view of matters, you may have regard to the government, you should have regard to another material consideration. The weight you give it is a matter for you. I hope that's clear.
Yes, that is. Thank you very much, Mr. Leader. Okay, Mr. Prunos? Okay, Mr. Yabsley.
Thank you very much, Chairman. And just to extrude that last point slightly further, I don't believe we are, or the developer is allowed to add the square meterage of the garage to the house build, is it? No. Thank you. I think that clarifies for me. Chairman. Thank you, Chairman. Chairman, I'm a simple chap, and I'm very grateful to my eminent colleagues for talking in such detail. But just looking at the outlines of the two buildings, and perhaps we could go back to the illustrations of the buildings. Thank you. That's the one. For me, they're very different. And Chairman, I think we accept there is development allowable on this site. There is access to it. I hear in the room that there is acceptance of that fact. But that, for me, that is not a replacement for that. That is two different. Chairman, I think that we should go with our officer's recommendation so that our applicant can come back with something that is acceptable to our planning officers. And I will propose that.
I was going to say, Mr. Yabsley, are you actually making a proposal? So you are proposing that the officer's recommendation should be accepted. Is that seconded? Ms. Stacey?
Chairman, I'd like to second it and say that I've listened very carefully to everything that's been said. I think Mr. Yabsley brings us in sharp focus to the main question, which is the scale and the similarity. And I have to say that he's really summed it up for me, that there is too much of a difference, but that there is still an opportunity for the applicant to come back with something that will reflect the original property. That's why I've seconded it.
Okay, so we've now got a motion on the table to accept the officer's recommendation. So if we could perhaps concentrate our thoughts on that, that would be helpful. So does any member now wish to speak? No, Mrs. Lawrence, I think you were the next one actually on the list.
Yes.
Mrs. Lawrence.
Briefly, this is such a sensitive area in a very beautiful spot, and we need to be absolutely sure that the design and setting is correct, because we all love it and we don't want it to see it spoiled, but on the other hand it's somebody's home and it needs to be improved. So I think I agree with what you've just said. We need to have another look at this very carefully so that we don't look back and wish we'd taken a bit longer or a bit more thought about it, because I'm very keen that we listen to all the people that have spoken very seriously about what we all love, which is nature, but equally a home needs to be there.
Right, thank you very much. I've got Mr. Bray next, and then Mr. Olsen. Okay, Mr. Bray.
Yes, I'd just like to, standing back, we've obviously been focused on the definitions of similar, but actually we again stand back and just see the views of the local people, which I know are good people, live in the community and want to have people living in that area. We need housing in this area, but this isn't the right house in the right area. I support what people are saying now about coming back on something else, because I think it does need something there. We don't want it to be derelict. I know some local people may not like that, but I think it's right to have something there which is very appropriate. It's a very unique site. It's unlike anything. If you didn't do the site visit, it is a unique place. Fran, you're talking about access. The access is limited by trees that you get through. A farm can access so far with his tractor. He can't actually drive past the front of the, I know this firsthand from the farmer, he can't really drive past very well front of the building. It's not wide enough. If he drives past the front of the building, I know we're slightly on planning, but the walkers wouldn't be able to get past. So that's the vision you've got to have, sneaking past. And it's a bridleway, it's not just a footpath, it is a bridleway, or horses ride down. I've ridden horses there, so it is a bridleway, which adds to the access thing. But we know they have got legal access to their dwelling. I struggle to see why we wouldn't get more access there. I mean, we're bound to get more access there if someone starts living there. You know, Tesco's aren't going to deliver there, they can't get through the river. The farmer himself got stuck in that stream. He got washed up against the bridge. So yeah, just standing back, I mean, if we ignore the weight of local opinion, I think that also feels wrong as well. But I will go along, I think if we can shape the design to get something there which is appropriate and of similar or reflect the existing, I think that's the right thing. And perhaps a better landscaping approach to make sure it blends in slightly more, because it is such a special spot. People walk there, not because of just the coastal path, they walk there because of the special nature of that area. You know, my family's done it for many years, my granddad used to walk down there. It is a very special area. It's not a blue anchor, and therefore I think that the importance that we are placing on similar and reflect is more important, because it's not just the standard brownfield site. It is something very special, so I think it's right we've spent a lot of time reflecting. And if we're not sure on the design, let's get it right. Let's make sure it's right, and so we have the right property there.
Right, thank you very much, Mr. Ray. Mr. Olsen.
It is. One thing I've learned on being on this planning committee for a while now is that the only thing worse than criticising the policy is wishing for a different application. We have to look at the application in front of us. We are not here to edit it. We're not here to wish it were different. We're not here to redesign it. We're here to examine and judge the application that is in front of us. To that we have to apply some common sense. And we have to ask ourselves whether replacing a single-storey, three-bedroom bungalow with a single-storey, three-bedroom bungalow is accordance with policy HCD 17. My belief is that it is, and that I think does reflect the common sense. It does reflect how the policy is worded, and it also reflects the intention of the policy, which is to allow replacement dwellings in previously developed areas or brownfield sites, as this is. The problem with talking about the locality, the location, the landscape, is that is very ill-defined. What do we mean? Do we mean 100 metres, 1,000 metres? Do we need 100 hectares, 2,000 hectares? Does this encompass Minehead, or does it only include this particular stretch? And it's fine to talk about it in that way because we all love the landscape and we want to protect it. But the trouble is, when we get too vague and abstract about it, it's hard for us to try and make sensible decisions. And I think also, I want to pick on something that was mentioned earlier, that what's been applied here, or officers have applied, an objective measure to massing and scale. If an objective measure has been used in square inches, areas, volumes, feet, cubits, or whatever, it ain't in the report. So that has not been applied. It is a matter of judgment about basically how this is derived at. And there's something I want to come on to as well, because I think it's a distraction. It's something in that, here, we're talking about this idea of again, the officer's report talking about this is relatively plain, low in height, and modest in scale and appearance, and I think this is coming up a lot, and the picture tells us it, right? It is a modest dwelling because it's, you know, a bit dilapidated, not looking its best. And I think this idea that the new one needs to reflect the appearance, the modest appearance, the plainness of the existing dwelling, I can't find that in policy. I also can't see how a larger scale and mass would draw the eye for the walkers, for the people on the coast path, except from the fact that, as allowed by the policy, anything that is within this policy that goes on this particular site, by virtue of simply being new, if it was an exact replica of the existing one, but just bigger to take up the square footage, is going to draw the eye. Any change will draw the eye. And as I said before, the purpose of the policy here at HCD 17 is to try and manage that process of change as sensitively as we can within the landscape and within the policies that we have. We've also heard mentions of words like, you know, elaborate design. The more elaborate design, well, that's because it's designed. Would a simpler design be better? Would a flat roof be better? Well, that wouldn't accord with other buildings as they look. Many buildings in Exmoor have that step design. Buildings are 300 years old. This reflects that. I live in one of them, which is an elongated house with a step design that was built 300 years ago. And incidentally, when it was built, it was a great example of gentrification. Yet now gentrification is something to be deplored. Well, that's new to me. And again, that's not in our policy. So these are distractions, I think, from something where we need to see the baseline in a different way, which is to replace a rather disreputable building with something that is actually new and has a decent purpose in order to do it. I've got comments to make about things like the lighting and the windows and stuff like that, because I also think there are some issues there that we need to go through, but there's no point going through them if we're not going to get past this particular point. So again, I will leave those to the side for now.
Thank you, Mr. Olsen. Mr. Holton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've been reading the background notes or the guidance for the policy, and I've been looking at 6.186 again, and particularly the sentence that says the replacement dwelling should be sited on or close to the existing footprint of the building unless the benefits that may be achieved for landscape character, wildlife or cultural heritage can justify the replacement dwelling to be sited in an alternative location. In such situations, locations that are inherently more sustainable will be favoured, such as replacing a remote substandard dwelling in the open countryside with a dwelling in the nearby settlement. I seem to have heard lots of arguments today, but it kind of underlines to me that what we should be looking at is that guidance, and we should take on board that this is a dwelling that is in a very, very sensitive location, and maybe look at that guidance and learn from it.
Mr. White.
Chairman, if I may, just a couple of points to make, really. I mean, the whole discussion around impact needs to be context driven. We need to have regard to this site specifically. So does this design work on this site as opposed to, are we adverse to gentrification in general? The answer to the latter is no. In terms of the context of the site, we know that the new dwelling must reflect the scale and mass of the existing dwelling, okay? But in doing so, it also has to have an acceptable impact on the character and appearance of that landscape. If I can ask members to turn to page 24 of the agenda papers, I'm going to read a passage from Landscape Officer's comments, because it's hearing from someone other than me on this as well. And I think her comments sort of midway down the third paragraph on page 24 are helpful. I will read those. It says, "My concern over the footprint, scale and massing of the proposed dwelling remains, as per previous comments on this application and the withdrawn planning application. The existing dwelling, with its small footprint and low height, does not appear dominant and is visually unobtrusive. In a locality where the nearest development is Bossington at approximately half a kilometre in distance, and where there is a strong sense of naturalness and tranquility on this coastal margin, the dwelling is sympathetic in scale, does not impose itself on its remote wooded setting, nor detract from the sense of place. The proposed dwelling makes more of a statement in terms of architectural design and detailing, and when combined with a larger footprint, increased height and stepped roof, would have a greater prominence in the landscape and a greater impact on the naturalness of the setting, tranquility and sense of place. The appearance of a small, low-key cabin in the woods would be lost and replaced with a larger, more prominent dwelling that is less sympathetic in scale and has a greater impact on the landscape. So I think that gives us clear direction in terms of where we consider the harm arises.
Chairman, a quick point of Mr. White just read out the thing and he accidentally said stepped roof instead of steep roof, which is kind of very important.
Okay. Does any other member who hasn't perhaps said that much yet wish to speak? Mrs. Nicholson and then Mr. Elson.
Merely that we should remember this is a dwelling house. It's not a cabin, it's not bossy, it's a dwelling house. And we're thinking about dwelling houses and the change in dwelling houses. And that a square, rather ugly dwelling house, replaced by a longer and therefore in impression not so dramatic dwelling with a stepped roof which looks like a series of small buildings is the question that we're considering. And we're considering that against a house, a dwelling house, however it's constructed and however dilapidated it is, with its absolutely four-square definiteness in a place where you would not expect four-square definiteness. And something about sitting in the landscape is important.
Right, thank you, Mrs. Nicholson. I ask again, is there any member that hasn't really said anything very much yet that wishes to speak? If not, Mr. Elson has asked to come back, and I will allow it because we are having a free flow of debate, and I think it's important that Mr. Elson is allowed to make his comment.
Thank you, Chair. That comment about the low-key cabin in the woods that to me undermines a lot of that case because it isn't, and that is a problem. Policy CEF6 asks us, again, thinking about character, landscape within Exmoor, is how can buildings basically enhance distinctiveness, that's the phrase. That's what we're looking for, something that enhances the distinctiveness of Exmoor, its landscape, its character, its heritage, its buildings. But yet, in this case, what we want is something that doesn't do that. What we want is a building that actually is modest, is plain, undistinctive, is a cabin, is as basically... and that idea that, of course, in order to meet the policy, in order to actually basically comply with HCD 17, it needs to be something that is well designed and with other policies as well, and yet it almost in enhancing distinctiveness, it also needs to be basically unobtrusive. It needs to be unnoticeable. It needs to be something that people on the path walking past it won't see. It won't draw the eye. The trouble is, it's a new building, so it will draw the eye. So I just feel that we're caught here in a bit of a kind of a contradiction, and are therefore losing sight of the basics. And the basics, as I say, comes back to HCD 17, which is HCD 17 allows a replacement building on a site, in a brownfield site, as this is, which, and we won't go over all the issues again about massing and scale and area and all the rest of it, but I just feel that to get distracted by the idea that the existing building is so sort of modest and damp and undistinguished is not something that needs to be carried forward into the new building, and policy does not suggest that it is. And also, I do challenge the idea that that building represents Exmoor, that building represents the best architecture we have, that is somehow redolent of the character of Exmoor. It just is not, and we shouldn't be distracted by that. Yeah, again, I have other things to make about fenestration and stuff like that, but again, I don't think there's much point going there unless we decide to pick up that subject.
Thank you. I think we're moving towards a vote, but Dr. Kelly.
Yes, this may be the last word I have on this, but I just wanted to make a point here, Chair. It's that the authority respects the expertise of its officers. In this case, we've got the head of planning, who's a very experienced senior officer, and it follows, it's reasonable to assume that the agenda before us and the officer report sets out the policy framework correctly. It's also reasonable to assume that this senior officer has correctly identified the policies and that he's exercised his professional judgment in assessing or judging this proposal against those policies. I'm in no doubt that he has done so professionally and correctly, and I'm pleased that other members consider the same. And that brings me on to the next point. On that basis, the recommendation in terms of policy, in my view, is most definitely the correct judgment to be made, and I can identify no material considerations that would indicate that we should arrive at a decision other than one consistent with the officer's recommendation. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Dr. Kelly. Mr. Bray.
Thank you, Chairman. Just picking up a point Dominic made there about implying a new property has to be almost standing out. It doesn't have to, does it? I mean, I'm not an architect, I'm an engineer, so I wouldn't be good at designing it, but as we've been indicated, good architect should be able to get the building and the setting in the land. This is up high. It could actually land, if I was building a shed, I'd dig it in and lose it. You could be lost, but it's been sat up through design, not dropped down. So I think architecturally it could be made to blend in. But big tall windows are not Exmoor-like. I mean, I live in an old farmhouse, they're not big tall windows on that. So it could be for architecture made to blend in far better. But I don't think that's been the main priority. The main priority, I would have thought, is a great design with great views within. So architecture, go along with what the planning officer is saying, could be improved to come up with something which would work better there. That's all.
Right, Mrs. Nicholson, your hand was up.
Thank you. Absolutely, we respect the expertise of our officers. We absolutely respect their professionalism. We welcome all the things that they have said. We welcome the reports. We welcome the answers to questions. We welcome the advice. There is no point in us being here. Our function is to look at the difficult matters of judgment. And there may be times when we come to the same decision, and there may be times when we come to a different decision. And that does, if we ever come to a different decision, it does not mean that we do not respect the advice we have given us. And it should not be thought by anybody that it does mean that.
Thank you, Mrs. Nicholson. Right, I don't see any other member wishing to speak at the moment, and we have been going for just about 2 hours. So I think this is probably an appropriate moment to put the motion to accept the officer recommendation to the vote. Unless officers wish to add anything at this stage, can I remind you that in the recommendation, which is printed on page 6, we have to add plus policy CES6 to reason for refusal number 1. And in reason for refusal number 2, lines 5 and 6 are to be amended to read insufficient evidence to demonstrate that the proposal would cause harm to statutory protected species, would not cause harm to statutory protected species. So not cause harm to is the replacement wording. Is everybody clear about that? So, may I then please see all those in favour of accepting the recommendation of refusal? And may I see all of those against? And there are no abstentions. So, in that case, the recommendation to refuse has been passed. Thank you. Please, we must thank the officers for having worked through this so carefully. Thank you, Mr. Leader, for your advice today. Can I thank all of those who have participated today, both supporting the application and opposing it, for your very valuable contributions. We will now have a recess of 10 minutes, so we will reconvene at 5 minutes to 4. Thank you. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we'll move on then, if we may, to item 6924006 LB. No, we're not at all. We're going to move on to one before. I can beg your pardon. I skipped one. There we go. 640240002, which is Jasmine Cottage, Winsford. This is for proposed erection of a single-storey rear extension and replacement windows, and this is going to be presented by Mr. Rose.
Thank you, Chair. Okay, so Jasmine Cottage is a non-listed building that was originally called Ashdale and housed a construction business which was later converted into a 4-bedroom linked detached dwelling. The roof is clad with double Roman tiles and the walls are painted render. The windows are cottage-style painted timber casements. To the rear of the existing property is a single-storey kitchen extension that has an asymmetrical dual-pitch roof with external materials that match that of the main dwelling. The proposal is to demolish the existing rear extension and to erect a parapet wall flat roof extension. The application also seeks planning permission to replace all of the existing painted timber windows at the property and to replace them with a UPVC alternative. The application site is located within the centre of the village of Winsford and subsequently within the centre of Winsford Conservation Area on Edbrook Road. Here is an aerial site plan to provide more visual context of the site and its surroundings. And here is a proposed site and block plan illustrating the scale of the proposed rear extension and indicating that all the windows on the existing building are proposed to be replaced. Here are the existing floor and elevation plans, clearly indicating the current status of the dwelling. The proposed site and elevation plans provide detailed information about the planned extension. The existing extension to be demolished has an external floor space of approximately 14 square metres, and the proposed new extension measures at approximately 33 square metres. This new extension would project 5 metres from the rear elevation and have a width of 6.8 metres. It will be constructed using painted render under a parapet hidden flat roof. The proposed parapet will feature a stone cap with decorative cornice detailing. The flat roof itself will be finished in grey fiberglass and will include 2 painted metal lantern roof lights, which will be partially concealed behind the parapet. Additionally, the application seeks planning permission to replace the existing painted timber windows with UPVC. However, whilst the application details include the Residence 9 brochure, specific details regarding the design of the proposed windows have not been provided. So here are some photographs of the existing site, starting with the principal elevation. And here is the existing rear elevation. So the primary concerns with this application focus on the proposed design, scale, materials and massing of the development, particularly its impact on the character and appearance of the Winsford Conservation Area. Clause 1 of policy HCD15 allows residential extensions if they adhere to the design principles in CES 6, avoid overdevelopment and maintain residential amenity space. Extensions must be proportionate to the original dwelling and must not exceed 35% of the original floor space. Whilst it is noted that the proposed extension meets the floor space criteria in this case, expanding the original dwelling space by only 14%, officers have concluded that the proposed extension fails to comply with Clause 1A of Policy CES 6. This policy requires new developments to positively contribute to their surroundings in terms of siting, massing, scale, height, orientation, density and layout. The extension's flat roof design and detailing do not harmonise with the existing dwelling, making the extension appear excessively dominant, especially as it extends 5 metres from the rear elevation. This results in the scale and massing of the extension being disproportionate to the main dwelling, contrary to policy CED3, CED4 and CES6. Furthermore, Clause 1B of policy CES6 specifies that new developments should use materials and design elements that complement the local context through traditional and sustainable building materials. Whilst the proposed painted render walls for the extension are acceptable, the switch from timber windows to UPVC is not supported. Policy CED3 requires that development proposals in conservation areas ensure that the area's character or appearance is preserved or enhanced, using high quality design and materials reflecting local architectural quality. The centre of Winsford was designated as a conservation area on April the 4th, 2023. According to the Winsford Conservation Area appraisal document, the village features a variety of building styles and types, predominantly vernacular with minimal ornamentation. Common materials include thatch, slate and clay tiles, often combined with rendered stone or cob. Flat roofs are not typical within the conservation area itself. So Jasmine Cottage was built in 1866. It's noted within the appraisal documents for its significance in the village centre, adjacent to what is now known as the old timber store. Given these considerations, the design details involving a flat roof and UPVC materials are deemed detrimental to the conservation area's character. Additionally, Section 72 of the Planning Listed Buildings and Conservation Areas Act 1990 imposes a statutory duty on local planning authorities to pay special attention to the desirability of preserving or enhancing the character or appearance of that area. Although the proposals offer some public benefits, such as improved accommodation and increased energy efficiency, they do fail to conserve and enhance Exmoor's built and historic environment and the Winsford Conservation Area's character itself. The design does not adequately reflect the original building's historic or architectural significance. Consequently, the benefits do not outweigh the harm caused to the conservation area, leading to the conclusion that the proposals do not meet the requirements of policies CES 6, CED4 or HCD 15. As such, taking into account the issues noted within this presentation and within my report, it's considered that the proposed development is largely in conflict with the local plan and the National Planning Policy Framework in regards to its design, scale, materials and massing. As such, the case officer recommends that planning permission be refused for the reasons I set out within my report. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rose. Mr. Wilkinson, the applicant, is unable to attend today, but he has asked that a statement on his behalf be read out by the planning officer. who will have 2 minutes from when he starts to speak.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you all for the opportunity to add the submission Adam Elston of Architectural Studio has provided. Apologies that I cannot be there in person as I had booked a holiday away already. Jasmine Cottage has been much altered since its construction in the 1860s, with the change of use and the removal of several functional buildings. It is now a well laid out first floor with 4 double bedrooms and 2 bathrooms and an ineffective ground floor. When the structure was converted from a house and workshop to purely a house in the 1960s, changes were made that have left a legacy of issues. A small awkward kitchen, see planning reference 54663 in 1962. Sometime later, a poorly built utility room lobby was added to the kitchen, resulting in the ugly and lopsided structure that also has a very poor insulation but the best view of the valley. The windows are in 5 different styles in 10 different formats. The narrow space to the right of the kitchen is prone to damp and of little use. A non-traditional concrete tile roof in beige, hence why we haven't had it cleaned, replacing the slates. The low ceiling height in the original structure result in low first floor windows, most ground floor rooms that are dark with little interaction with the garden and view, spaces poorly suited to an effective, well-insulated, properly ventilated kitchen, an unattractive and incoherent site which can be seen from the recreation ground and is not in keeping with the local styles. We have installed appropriate ventilation for the bathrooms and a modern heating system to address the damp issues of a solid wall structure. In designing the changes... Okay. In designing the changes, our objectives are to create an attractive and more coherent rear of the house, reduce the heating required with a modern, more sustained structure, provide space and ceiling height for an effective kitchen diner that links the garden for those sunny days, create a better utility boot/dog space with its own messy entrance which would have the best view, without significant and wasteful structural change to the original and much altered stone building.
Okay.
All right.
Yes. Thank you. Right. Thank you, Mr. Wilkinson via Mr. Rose. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, so you have the report before you. Dr. Kelly.
Just a point of clarification, Mr. Chairman. This applicant has been represented by a professional agent. Was there any negotiation or any acknowledgement of the conservation area character appraisal or the policies as part of any discussion before the application came in?
So before the application actually came in, I don't believe there was any discussion surrounding pre-app or anything like that, but there has been discussions during the application stage.
Can I just ask, was an amended design invited?
Yes, we did speak about the possibility of an amended design in regard to the flat roof and the UPVC windows, but we've not had one received.
Right, thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Petrinos.
Thanks, Chairman. Yeah, I can quite see why the applicant's put in this application to increase the usable accommodation area downstairs in his house. The trouble is, of course, the design, which Dr. Kelly's just touched on. And I imagine he got advice on, because we seem to have been, I know it's going to be a different application each time, but we seem to have been in a situation again and again where we've got UPVC windows being applied for in the conservation area, and almost invariably we turn it down, and that's in addition to the unusual design, the flat roof and the excess mass, which is quite odd. So I'd like to move the officer's recommendation.
That's seconded by Dr. Kelly. Mrs. Nicholson, you wish to come in?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't want to particularly comment on the style of the and design of the extension, but I do want to make a couple of other points which may or may not be considered relevant, but I think they're relevant, but they may not be part of the decision. At the last planning committee, we had a not quite flat roofed extension that we turned down in Cuckham. It was in a similar sort of arrangement with a very small front garden with a wall around it, and that particular house didn't have a large garden behind it, had no garden at all behind, and it was clearly overdevelopment. It was clearly unreasonable and impacted on the street scene in a huge way. Now, I don't think Cuckham's a conservation area, that's, I think, slightly neither here nor there, but the impact on the street scene certainly weighed with me on that one. Here, we have a conservation area, and we are enjoined to be very careful about conservation areas, as we should be. The proposal for the flat-roofed extension will not impact at all on the street scene, will not impact on anybody in the middle of Winsford in any way, because they will not be able to see it. I don't believe it impacts on houses on either side, because I don't think they look at it. It is noticeable that it can be seen from the recreation ground, as the papers say, the applicants say so. It's from a real public place, the road, from the entrance to the only place you can look through is the entrance to the recreation ground. It's quite difficult to find it. So there's that bit. The other bit is that while it's noticeably larger than the current extension, it's in, unlike the Cuckham one, it's in a large garden. The impact on that will be very small. So I am always a bit worried by us objecting to things that can't really be seen. Doesn't mean to say I like the look of it at all. I don't. But I am worried that we are very worried about impact on a conservation area, when actually what you see is something quite different. You won't see it at all. Now, the only remark I'll make about the UPVC windows is that I think we make far too much about them, but I know what our rules are. I do think we ought to change them. But that's a debate for another day.
Indeed. Right, thank you, Mrs. Nicholson. Is there anything else, Mr. Bray?
I was born in Windsor, so I know this area very well, and much just to hear the history. I think I was born in the sawmills where they obviously sell the wood here. Picking on what Franz said, it wasn't a site visit, I drove past it recently because I know that people are going to be saying to me about this application, and it does strike me that it's not going to be visible. And I guess the policy is the policy, but it's not going to be visible from the road. And I used to go in the river playing, and I can't see it being very visible from many areas. The other thing I'm struggling with, I hate UPVC windows. But when you drive past, the old shop next door has got UPVC windows, which they adjoin. I've just checked it on Google Link. I know that the policy is the policy. But we'll be judged in terms of when you look at the property. To the left, they've got UPVC windows. You go down the road, they've got UPVC windows on the right. So, again, my understanding, I don't like UPVC windows, but that's how our decision will be judged against how it looks. But I guess the policy is the policy, or is the preamble, as we've just come across. So I can see why the officers have met that position, but it is quite a tricky one when you see the context. You can't see the extension. The property needs modernising. I know the people who bought it and the old people there before didn't modernise it. So it's a real balance, and I take the point Mike has said. It's sort of unfortunate that it didn't get more of a discussion in the planning stage, but we've got what we've got, haven't we? And a flat roof, we've already had discussions about is flat roof okay in some situations, and I'm not going to go against flat roofs, of course. But maybe this design isn't the right one, but we've got to assess it, won't we? So I'll be interested in the comments from the planning officers saying you drive in that road and there's PVC windows. It's almost like the horse has bolted. So yes.
Okay, thank you. I mean, obviously we've got to consider the application before us, and officers, I'm sure, will comment. I suspect that for some of these issues there are solutions that could be achieved, but in your view, this isn't that. Please do.
Chairman, I was just going to add that, I mean, good design is good design, whether you can see it or not. I mean, it's part of the issue with this is it's flat roof, but it's also actually the depth of projection, the scale at the back of the property, which officers are picking up on. Obviously, there are issues. The proposal is to replace the windows. The existing windows are particularly characterful. They're attractive timber windows, which actually contribute to the positive qualities of the conservation area. So to lose those would cause harm, even acknowledging there are existing new PVC windows about. I don't know if Tom might not want to have that. But the other thing with this, Chairman, is officers have approached the agent to make some changes. We think there is a solution. The agent, if you like, has wanted to test the committee. He's not wanting to work with officers at the minute, which does happen from time to time. They want the application to come to committee to actually get the committee's view. Dare I say, if it's unsuccessful, they'll come back to officers and we can then continue those discussions, or they may wish to appeal, or do both. But that's the situation we've reached. That's why we're here today, because we've been unsuccessful in pulling a change to the scheme.
Thank you, Mr. White. Mr. Gein.
Thank you, Chairman. This has come to us because the Parish Council recommended approval and the officers haven't. And the reason they didn't, I think, was quite reasonable, and I think it's been backed up by Francis and what Andrew said. However, I do agree that it's a design problem here. You can just see it from one place when you get up to the cricket ground, but it doesn't really matter whether you can see it or not, in my opinion. So I think refusal is the right thing in this case, but I think the Parish Council must understand why. It's not that they were wrong, but they hadn't really understood the implications of what was going to happen. So I'm happy to support the recommendation.
One of our former members, Michael Scott, used to say, God can see it.
Yes, I was going to say that.
Miss Stacey.
Really, just echoing... Echoing what other people have been saying, I do think if we want to change the design guidelines, we have a timetable for that. We have our rules currently, and let's interpret them as we should. Otherwise, we're just there's a lot of hot air, but we can't move on. And yes, I was going to say the immortal words of our late member Michael Scott, God can see it, which is always his answer to us. So, yeah, see what you said too. Well, yeah.
He's a final arbiter, of course.
Right. Is there any other member that wishes to speak, please? If not, it has been moved and seconded that the officer's recommendation of refusal should be approved. So may I see all those in favour of refusal, please? Thank you very much. Right. We do now come to item 6924006LB, which is an application for listed building consent for the proposed internal rearrangement to reception area, outdoor signage and installation of a defibrillator, which if we have many more tense sessions like today, we'll need. So, this is going to be presented by Mr. White.
Thanks, Chairman. I shouldn't take too long. It's the application relates to works which will enable the National Park Centre to move to Exmoor House. So that's the basis that the proposal before us. There's a location plan showing us where Exmoor House is, which I believe everyone knows. The proposal does include 4 signs to go on the building, one just above the main door, a little information panel on the frontage, and then another no entry sign basically to along the front, and then on the end gable, so the gable towards the car park, there's another interpretation panel, and on that gable, obviously at ground floor, is where the defibrillator would be located. So that's the external changes or additions to the building itself. Internally, that's just a partial floor plan. The main entrance into Exmoor House is here, so you currently come to the foyer. The proposal is that all that sort of timber framed glazing section there would come out. It would also come out just behind the main reception desk to the officer's room there. That wall would go. So there's a red showing the four sections of walls that would go. They're not historic fabric, and then there's it's non-historic fabric. The blue section there is an internal wall, but it's got a window with a door in it. The proposal is that that be plasterboarded up to create a new, larger reception space within the building to allow the National Art Centre to relocate and provide a reception for Exmoor House as well. Basically, Chairman, the proposal is judged to be okay from a listed building point of view, and it's recommended to be approved as set out on page 82 of the agenda papers.
Thank you. Mrs. Smith.
Thank you. Do you have a sample of the style of the signage that will be used for this? And will it be the same as what we've already got?
We don't have a sample. There's a condition proposed which would deal with the detailing of the signage. I imagine it would be of a similar livery to other national park signage. There will be consistency across the board.
Mrs. Nicholson.
Two things. One, as with signage, a sign at right angle, sticking out from the building. This is a very, very splendid listed building. Its frontage is really important, very important in this town. I don't think we should be sticking signs sticking out at right angles from it. I think it's absolutely wrong. That's the first thing. The second thing is, and this is not a planning consideration, but I can't see any other place where I can say it. We decided we were going to move the information centre down here without having planning permission to do it. I think we're going, we as an authority are back to front.
Well, I suppose in truth you wouldn't apply for planning permission until you'd actually taken the decision to move, because,
You didn't decide to move till you knew you could do it.
Well, I have to say, even I would suspect that going to the expense of applying for planning permission for something that we haven't decided to do, you might be putting the cart before the horse a bit. But we'll argue about that out of the meeting, Mrs. Nicholson. Was there anybody else who wished to speak? Oh, really? And have my wrist slapped for the privilege. Mrs. Lawrence.
Yes, I think this is a great project. I think it should work well when it's sorted out. I'm very excited about it, and I hope it all goes to plan.
Could I just have explained to me, because I'm actually now intrigued by it that it's been raised, right-angled sign into I icon when open as a centre and ENPA stag and triangle were not. So how does that work?
It's going to be electric, I suspect.
Right down to that's even worse.
Would you like to ask Mr. Kennedy?
Chairman, Dan is here if he's allowed to.
We're just taking advice as to whether or not he is allowed to.
No.
Perhaps if Mr. James, as an officer, could just come and take a position next to Mr. White and could quietly tell him.
Yeah, thank you, members. Just to clarify, what is proposed is a very simple kind of square sign, which would, so this is going to be a seasonal centre, so from April through to October when the centre is open, it would have an eye sign on it to demarcate it as an information centre. During the winter when we close, we would take that down and we would simply replace it with the stag icon so that it's just there as a kind of corporate identity as our head office.
Well, there we feel much better informed. That's what an information centre is for, isn't it? Right. Anything else, ladies and gentlemen?
Well, can I make a proposal?
Well,
Yes, Mr. White. Just as a point of clarification, Chairman, given the use class as they are now, we don't believe it would require planning permission to relocate the centre to the National Park offices. It would be within the same use class.
If I may, Mr. Chairman, that wasn't the point of what I was making. The point of the vote was, were you going to get listed building consent for the changes to the building in order for the site to move? And it feels as though we are required to permit this because that's what everybody wants to do. And that doesn't feel right to me. And I want to propose turning it down because of the ruddy signs. I'm perfectly happy with the indoor work.
Just vote against it.
Well, I'm proposing not.
I'd like to move the recommendation if it doesn't do
And then everybody can overrule it.
right, I'm going to take Mr. Stacey's moving of the recommendation, Mr. Yabsley's seconding of it, and put that to the meeting and see what the temperature might be as a result. May I see all those pleas in favour of approval? Right. Any against, Mrs. Nicholson? Thank you. So that is passed with one vote against. Goodness for that. Good. Item 6. Item 6 is applications delegated to the Chief Executive. I think every single one of them on this occasion has either been approved or didn't require prior approval. So we'll just take them page by page. Is there anything on page 1 that anybody wants to raise? Anything on page 2? No, thank you. So they stand noted. Site visits, if any, will be on the 2nd of August. I have not been advised of any other business of urgency, so I will thank you very much for your attention this afternoon. It's been a long and at times quite difficult meeting, but it's been handled very well, and I do want to thank again Mr. Leader for being here.
Thanks very much.
Because it does make such a difference, doesn't it, to have the sort of advice that we had from him. Right, thank you all very much.